Well, g'day and thank you for joining me on this very special Mother's Day message, Saved by the Bell. Today we're going to be having a look at the opening chapters of Exodus and examine the lives of 5 women, or at least 5 different groups of women, who together significantly shaped the life of arguably Israel's greatest ever leader. In fact, after Jesus, you could say the greatest leader of all biblical history, Moses. You see, before Moses ever met God at a burning bush, before he ever confronted Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go," before he ever operated in signs, wonders, and miracles, called the 10 plagues down on Egypt, parted the Red Sea, led God's people through, before he ever encountered God once more at Sinai, received the 10 commandments, established Israel as a nation in its own right with its own complex civil law code, before he ever built a tabernacle and led God's people for 40 years, before any of that happened, Moses' life was significantly shaped by influential women in and around his sphere of influence, okay? And in fact, more than just being shaped by these women, as we see time and time and time again, Moses' life was saved by these women in quite unique and profound ways. And so that's why I've called this message today, Saved by the Bell. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the fairy tale, and this is actually a story that I tell my 4-year-old daughter sometimes when I put her to sleep, The Beauty and the Beast. And the whole idea of that story is the beauty, okay, in that story is a character called Belle, who sees in an individual where other people just see a beast, she sees incredible potential. And the way that she relates to him brings out the best in him. In fact, rumor has it that that beast, his name is actually Adam. There's some sense in which all men, okay, are represented in that beast. Well, I kind of want to draw on that imagery today, okay, hence the title, Saved by the Bell. And brothers, this is a message for you today as well. We're going to be looking at a 3,500-year-old story in the book of Exodus, the second book in the Bible, and we look at the lives of these women who shaped the life of Moses. So if you have a Bible, open it up to the book of Exodus and let's go. All right, here we go. We're going to start our readings in Exodus 1 verse 15. The whole context of this story is basically established for us in the book of Genesis. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, otherwise known as Hebrews, or as they now start being called, the Israelites, are living in the land of Egypt, and they are there because there was a famine back in the story of Joseph, okay? God's people end up there in Egypt, and it's a few generations later now. The Pharaoh at the time does not look upon the Hebrew people favorably, to say the least, and that's kind of where we're picking up in the story here from verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. This is the first group of women in the story of Moses. Verse 16, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth, on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, then kill him. If it's a girl, well, you can let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. This is, in a way, is kind of the first act of feminism, of civil disobedience, okay, with these women here doing what they know is the right thing to do. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let these boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh with a little bit of a white lie. "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives even arrive." Okay? Not a lesson in honesty there. But anyway, a lesson in nobility nonetheless. Okay? A lesson here in courage. A lesson here in great bravery. One of the powerful things we see here in this story is that these women's names, these 2 midwives, this first group of women who saved Moses' life, essentially, okay, are named here, Shiphrah and Puah, for all posterity, for all time in eternity. These women's names have been written down. If you're a Christian here today, you will likely meet these women in heaven one day, okay? These are the great first heroes of the Exodus story. Without them, we would not even have an Exodus story because they saved Moses' life. And as you see, they demonstrated great bravery in doing so. Why? Because they feared God more than they feared man. And of course, with that great bravery comes great respect that we owe these two powerful women. It's interesting in this story that while these two women are named, the Pharaoh is not. There's actually a little bit of debate, a little bit of disagreement as to when exactly in history the Exodus story took place. Most people settle on around about 1450 BC, somewhere like that. We know it was within the what's called the New Kingdom era of Egypt, but we're not exactly sure which pharaoh it was who was in power at the time. And the reason for that is, or one of the reasons for that is, his name is not mentioned. Pharaoh, not worthy of mentioning his name, but these two midwives are. And one of the things I love about these women and the courage that they demonstrate here is that even though they themselves could not have children, they took it upon themselves the responsibility to care for the children within their broader community. Even though they themselves could not have children, they took on the responsibility to care for the children within their broader community. And I love what that reveals about their heart and their attitude. You know, I often say that the heart of the issue is an issue of the heart. The heart of the issue is an issue of the heart. And the reason that these two women could demonstrate such courage and such bravery outwardly is because they had first done business with God internally. Watch this.
Our outward behaviour comes from our heart condition. And the reason these women could be so proactive and courage, that's one thing. But the thing I love about them the most is the dealing that they had in their heart before their actions ever came. Think about it. These women were childless. They could not have kids. And some of us here understand the pain of that. Some of us here understand the disappointment of that. And all of us know that when we experience pain in life and when we experience disappointment in life, there is always the possibility and the tendency for that to develop a root of bitterness and resentment within us. That if I can't have something, then stuff the lot of you, I don't want anyone else to have it either. These women overcame that tendency. I can't have kids. But I tell you what, I'm going to do all in my power to make sure that the women around me can. Wow. Today's Mother's Day, and I'm going to be bold enough to speak on behalf of the leadership team of this church and say this. If you do not have kids today, if you can't have kids today, you are no less a woman than every other mum in this church family. And this church family needs you because it takes a village to raise a child. Yes. And these childless women were heroes who saved the life of Moses. These women were not maybe biologically related to Moses. I mean, somewhere distantly they were. What do they represent? They represent women in our community who may not even be mums, but who somehow form the soft infrastructure of the community around us. And today, because at the end, I'm going to give you some homework to do, like Catherine just did. I'm going to give you extend your homework today to not just go and thank mums, but to think of other bells in your life. And bells that have contributed to your life. There are women that have contributed to the community around you. The community you are involved in is better because of them. And they may not be mums. And today might be a tender day for them. And today might be the great day that you can go to them and say, thank you for being a woman in my community. Yep. Saved by the bell.
The next significant woman we see in Moses' early life is his mother. And this next passage we're going to read actually highlights three women: his mother, his sister, and then his adoptive mother, who in my eyes becomes his mentor. All right, so we pick up in chapter 2 and verse 1. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, some Bibles say that he was no ordinary child. I think the book of Hebrews brings that out there. She hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Now I'm going to pause right there. When you hear the word tar and pitch, particularly if you read the Bible sequentially, read the Bible chronologically, many of you know that's a great passion of mine. On my social media, I actually launch a whole 12-month plan helping people read through the Bible in a chronological fashion. Well, doing that, when you come to this story in Exodus, the word tar and pitch should actually remind you of something that you'd previously read in the book of Genesis, in the story of Noah. When Noah created the ark, he coated it, with tar and pitch. In fact, fascinating is this observation. The word there for basket in the Hebrew, we sort of miss this in the English, but if you go on a computer program and click on the word used for basket, it's exactly the same word used in the story of Noah, translated ark. In fact, it's the only time in the whole Bible this word in the Hebrew is mentioned. What Moses' mother did here, somewhere back in her family background, she was familiar with the story of Noah, that when there was impending judgment that was threatening to take out a whole generation, she knew that an ark with tar and pitch would save a righteous remnant. Powerful. So here she is. She builds Moses an ark with tar and pitch, just like the Noah story. All right, keep reading. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister, woman number 3, stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverside. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Here again, by the way, we see Pharaoh's daughter responding to this. As an Egyptian, she had a civic duty to kill this child. Once she saw a male Hebrew baby, the law had changed. I mean, after Pharaoh had caught out the midwives, by cheating the system, he upped the ante on social policy. And he, in fact, said that any Egyptian is permitted to kill Hebrew boys if they see them. And so here is Pharaoh's own daughter. Her heart goes out to this baby, and she too disobeys her own father's command by not murdering this boy. It's basically an act of Hebrew genocide. Right here, she ignores that command, and her heart goes out to this baby. Keep reading, verse 7. Then his sister suddenly popped her head out of the reeds and asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you to do it." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him back to Pharaoh's daughter. Can you imagine doing that as Moses' mum, taking your own son back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son? She, Pharaoh's daughter, named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." As I said here in this passage, in these 10 verses, we see 3 significant women that I want to draw your attention to. First of all, Moses' mother. Secondly, his sister, who we know later is Miriam. And thirdly, his adoptive mother, Pharaoh's daughter. So let's start with Moses' mum. You know, one of the most profound and mysterious things about Moses' mother, and we don't know a great deal about her, but one of the things we discover later is her name. It's not mentioned here, but in chapter 6 and verse 20, we find out that her name is Jochebed, or Jochebed. And basically, it's a compound name. The first part of her name, Yah, comes from the word for Yahweh, the name of God. Yahweh, Kabod, is the second half of her name. Yahweh, Kabod. And Kabod means glory. Moses' mum is the first woman in the Hebrew narrative, the first person in the Hebrew narrative to have their name consist of God's name, to have a compound name with the word Yahweh. Powerful, powerful stuff.
Many of you know all the way through the Bible, a lot of people have names that come from the word Yahweh. Jesus is Yeshua. Yahweh saves. Okay, a lot of names. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they have Yahweh in the name. Moses' mum's name is Jochebed. Yahweh Kabod. Yahweh glory. His mum's name is the glory of Yahweh. Now that is profound because God's people didn't know God's name was Yahweh until when? Until Moses met him at a burning bush at the age of 80. So how could Moses' mum be called the glory of Yahweh when they didn't even know God's name was Yahweh yet? 100 years before God said, my name is Yahweh, I am who I am. 100 years before that approximately. Her parents called her the glory of Yahweh. That's one possibility. One possibility is her parents were freakishly prophetic. The other possibility is this. Maybe Moses renamed his mum posthumously. Maybe Moses, 80 years of age, and when he's in the desert, he's writing down the Torah, he's writing his book. Maybe he looked back on the life of his mum. And whatever her name was, he called her. Maybe he didn't even know her name. Maybe he was so young when he left her, when he was weaned from her and given back to... Maybe he never knew his mum. So he looked back on her and called her Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, Jochebed. The glory of Yahweh. Somehow this mum revealed God's glory to Moses. She showed him what God is like. And mum, that is your profoundly high calling. The fact is, it's the high calling of every saint to reveal the name and nature of God. But as mums, that is my calling, to reveal God's nature to my kids. And one of the ways his birth mother did that is the moment he was born, she looked at him and said, this is a fine child. There's one thing I know about good mums, most all mums, is that they unconditionally love their kids. And what a better way to show the glory of who God is, who unconditionally loves his kids. One of the things I love about mums, and one of the ways she shows the nature of God, is that she was an incredibly courageous woman because she hid Moses at the threat of her own life. It was illegal for her. She knew. She hid him for 3 months, a crying baby, knowing that any day soldiers could come through the door, take him and take her. How many of you are glad for the courage of mums and how that demonstrates the courage of God? And what this woman also demonstrates is incredible wisdom. And this is one of the greatest challenges mums face, and all parents do, but I'm talking to mums. She operated in the wisdom and faced the real life challenge of knowing when it was right to hold on to her son and when it was right to let him go. And this poor mum had to do that twice. In fact, the reality is, as parents, we all know this, and this is one of the things about, I might be a young pastor, I might have young kids, but my church, a good portion of my church are grey heads. Older people. And one thing I've learned from them, from pastoring people in their 60s and 70s, is that you never stop being a mum. You never stop being a mum. And one of the constant tests that mums have is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And Jochebed did that. She did that at 3 months of age. She just knew, I've just got to let go. I've done what I can for 3 months. I've held on. But the time has come, Lord. I entrust him to you. I build an ark. And I give him into the hands of God. Later on, when she got him back, I've got my son back in my home again, able to nurse him. At some age later, she said, it's time to let him go again. And she had to let him go to Pharaoh's daughter. God has graced you to be a mum, mums. And God has given you the wisdom and the grace to know when It is right to hold on, and when it's right to let go. And it's tough, but it's possible. Inspiring woman.
The third belle that we see in the story here of Moses is his very own big sister, Miriam. She's the one there hiding in the reeds, watching her little baby brother float down the River Nile, looking and keeping an eye on him, which is something I'll mention in just a moment. Miriam becomes a very pivotal figure in the story of Moses and his leadership, becomes one of his biggest supporters, basically. She is there when God's people walk through the parted Red Sea with her tambourine, singing a song of praise to God, and she becomes what's known as a prophetess, the Bible's first ever female prophet. And here she is as a young girl. We don't really know how old she is, but she is keeping an eye on her baby brother. And that is something that I feel is really worth taking note of. You see, again, as you read through the Bible in a chronological order, one of the things that we notice is that all through the biblical narrative to this point, we witness a motif, we witness a theme, where in the Hebrew families, in the families of the Israelite people, they have a history, a bit of a family curse, if you like, a repeated pattern of behavior, where older siblings persecuted their younger siblings. In fact, that's the whole reason God's people are in Egypt to begin with. It's because of the story of Joseph, the younger brother who was persecuted by his older brothers. And that's something that you see all the way through the book of Genesis, right back, beginning with the story of Cain and Abel, the older brother who literally kills his younger brother. We see it in Abraham's sons. What's his name? Ishmael persecutes Isaac and Isaac's sons. Esau persecutes Jacob, the older persecuting the younger, the older persecuting the younger. It's like this repeated family curse that brings its way all the way through to the book of Exodus. That's why in the Gospels later on, 1,500 years later, Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son. What happens there? The older son persecutes the younger. It's exactly what we see in the book of Acts when the church is born. The new covenant son, the new covenant kid on the block comes along, born on the day of Pentecost. And what happens? The old covenant community, the older brother, persecute this little baby boy, this newly formed covenant community. Well, that is a familiar story. It has its roots all the way back in the book of Genesis. After all, the book of Genesis is not just a book of origins, it's not just a book of history, it's a book of prophecy. Okay? Genesis is a book of prophecy. After all, our God is He who knows the end from the beginning. He knows what's going to happen in the end, and He tells that story right back at the beginning. Well, that's exactly what God does in Genesis by establishing the motif. What's your point, Chad? The point is this. Miriam breaks that curse. Miriam answers Cain's question. When Cain said to God, had the audacity to say to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Miriam says, "Yes, I am." Miriam was a big sister who took upon herself the responsibility to look after her little brother and in a way broke the chain of that family curse that had been a part of her history up to that point. Some of us have the privilege and the ability to do that in our families as well, and that is a powerful, powerful thing to be able to do. Right here in Exodus chapter 2, we see Moses yet again saved by the bell.
I also love this in Miriam, that I don't know how old she was, but she was a prophetic woman. We know that. She's called a prophetess. I think she might be the first prophetess in the Bible. Okay, we know that at an older age. And one of the things I love about her prophetic ministry is that she not only saw a problem, she helped bring a solution. Yeah. It doesn't take a genius to see problems. You don't actually have to be very prophetic to see problems. We need prophetic giftings to help be part of the solution. Yeah. That's good. So I've noted there's nothing more I love in church to have people say, I noticed this and I've come up with an idea. Do you mind if I give that a go? I think this might work. I thought, yes. That's exactly what Miriam did. She saw a problem. She observed. She saw Pharaoh's daughter. She says, hello, I have an idea. I have a great idea to solve this issue. That is the sign of a prophetess. who can discern what needs to be done. The men of Ichabod, no, not the men of Ichabod, the men of Issachar knew the times and understood what to do. Issachar, Miriam models that right here. Wow. Moses, saved by the bell. And there's a third woman in this story that is a hero in a sense because she helped shape the life of Moses. We don't know her name, but we know her as Pharaoh's daughter. She sees a boy that she really should hate and kill. That's what she's been told. But it says that she has compassion on him. Not part of the family. Not part of her heritage. Not one of hers. Not her responsibility. Yet this woman becomes, in my eyes, a mentor to Moses. Yes. Think about it. Moses, even if he'd survived, thanks to the midwives, thanks to his mum, thanks to his sister, if he'd stayed in the Hebrew community, he would have grown up a slave. All he would have known was slave thinking. Now, he might have remembered some of the stories Mum and Dad told him at night time, like Noah's Ark, okay, and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all the stories they told. He might have had some of that Hebrew mentality, but he still would have brought up only in the culture, the Hebrew culture of the time, which was at the time a slave class, a slave culture. This woman had compassion on him and elevated him and exposed him to a whole new way of thinking. Yep. She was like many of you who teach kids, those of you who are educators, those of you who are mentors, those of you who have the opportunity, male or female, to speak into the lives of another generation. They're not your children, but you can expose them to another way of thinking. You can expose those kids in your classroom to kingdom thinking because they don't have that at home. You expose them to a realm of education they may not otherwise had. We are better off as a community when women rise up as mentors and say, you know what, I can take kids and show them an experience that they won't get in their home. One of the big pressures on teachers nowadays is to be substitute parents because we've got not that good a parenting happening around the place by and large. Okay. The ideal, of course, is not for teachers to be substitute parents, but a complement and to be able to say, look, I know there's weaknesses in your family. I will have compassion on you as a mentor. What do mentors do? They reveal their heart to people. Pharaoh's daughter revealed the heart to this child. And then also begin to educate his head to think in a different way. So Moses, the Hebrew, became Moses, the Egyptian, schooled in all the ways of Egypt. He entered into and got experience in a whole new realm of life he never would have had were it not for Pharaoh's daughter. Wow. How many of you are grateful for female mentors in your life? Like this woman that have exposed a whole new world for you that if it was just up to your natural mum, you would never have seen.
Well, the last woman that really helped to shape, if not save, the life of Moses in quite a unique way was a belle named Zipporah, and we're introduced to her as we continue to read from verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he's an adult now, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labour. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and then looking that way and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Israel's greatest ever leader, right here in verse 12. You know, this is a whole nother message for a whole nother day, but one of the powerful things we see here, or let me just say this, there's plenty of research out there that demonstrates just how important it is for males to have strong, loving and healthy male role models in their life. And that is actually something that we see Moses does not yet have in his life at this stage of his development. Our criminal system, our justice system, our prison systems are full of men. And they are full of men who've had fantastic women in their life, fantastic mothers, fantastic sisters, fantastic female mentors, but no father figure. and no significant male role model in their life. And there's a great book you can get if this kind of thing interests you called The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell, and he speaks to that. And as I said, that's a whole message for another day. But the point is, what we see here in Moses is this outburst of violence, this impulsive behavior that basically does not go unnoticed in the community around him. Let's keep reading, verse 13. The next day he went out and he saw two Hebrews fighting. This is what the Hebrew people did. I guess probably an older and younger brother fighting here. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me just as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become made known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Here, of course, again, like I said before, we see that whether this Pharaoh is his big brother, his big adopted brother, or whether this Pharaoh that tried to kill him is actually his adoptive father, we're not exactly sure. Either way, Moses at this stage in his life does not have particularly good male role models in his life. Verse 16. Now, all that was about to change. A priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered the flock for them. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, or Jethro, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" Let me just pause and say this. There's a couple of interesting notes here to make about this passage. First of all, we see here that Moses did the work of 7 women quicker than what they could do, which is kind of an interesting observation. But I only say that to say this. Ladies, don't get angry with me. The only reason I say that is to say this. Moses was royalty, okay? He grew up in the royal family. He'd probably never done a day of physical labor in his life, which begs the question, what motivates a man in the heat of the day to come to the rescue of 7 people that he does not know and work harder than they would at that time of the day? What would motivate a man to do that? Well, I might be taking a bit of creative license here, but I have a little bit of a theory. I think the only thing powerful enough to motivate Moses to do that was that he saw a beautiful woman in that crowd of 7 ladies, and he wanted to do all that he could to impress her. One of those girls caught Moses' eye. His shirt came off, his muscles came out, and he did all that he can to win her attention. Let's keep reading, verse 19. They answered, "An Egyptian," this is the daughters answering, "an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Well, where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why on earth did you leave him? Invite him to here to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, who eventually gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. And so here we see the 5th and the final bell in this story. Zipporah, Moses' wife, who would later become the mother of his children.
Zipporah gave birth to a son. Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I've become an alien in a foreign land." He was an alien in a foreign land. After all, he was a Hebrew who had been raised an Egyptian, who couldn't go back to his Hebrew community, couldn't go back to his Egyptian community. He was a no-man. He had no land. He had no people. He had no home. He had no purpose. He had no job. He had no prospects. He had no future. He had no idea. Sounds like a bunch of us men, doesn't it? He had no idea. And yet suddenly he meets this woman. And Moses, once more, is saved by the bell, who gives him a place to call home, who gives him a sense of purpose, gives him a reason to put his roots down, gives him a reason to say, for the next 40 years, this is my home, because if you're here, babe, then this is my home now. Zipporah, Moses' wife, saved from by the bell. The bell turned a beast. And with her assistance, he became a mighty prince. And it was 40 years later, in Midian, a Hebrew-born, Egyptian-trained Midianite, met God at a burning bush. And from that day, he became Israel's greatest leader of all time. So by the end of his life, he could say, listen, the ultimate great leader is coming in the future, and he's going to be very much like me. God will send you another prophet like me one day in the future. You better listen to him. Same, but different. Ultimately, one of the things that Moses does is he sets an example to Israel of what Jesus would be like. That's why there's so many parallels in the story. Killing of the babies. All right, all that sort of stuff. It's a picture. Moses is a picture of Jesus. But he never would have been the man he was if he did not have these women in his life. Over and over and over again, Moses was saved by the bell.
Well, folks, it's time for me to land this Bible teaching today, and I want to do that with a little word of encouragement for you this Mother's Day to consider those 5 groups of women in your life. Firstly, like Shifra and Fua, if I'm pronouncing their names right, consider the midwives. Consider those women somewhere in your community who may not be related to you, but somewhere have just provided strength for the community in which you live. They may be part of your church community, your work community, somewhere in your environment. There are women that you look up to and you've never actually told them. You've never acknowledged them. You've never said, listen, I want to thank you for the consistent role that you've played in the community. You have made the community I am part of a better place, and I want to thank you for that. Number 2, I want you to consider the Jochebeds in your life, okay? You're mostly, for many of us, are natural mothers. For some of us, are spiritual mothers, and find a way to respect them and to pay your respects and to honour and thank them today, and to thank them for the way that they have in some way revealed the glory of Yahweh to you. Thirdly, go for your sisters. Thank a sister today. Look for a Miriam, a big sister, someone who has taken you, as it were, under their wing, who has kept an eye out for you in your life, who has watched you at times as you've floated down the Nile and has been there to support you in your time of greatest need. Why don't you follow up and find a sister today and thank them? Fourthly, find a mentor like Pharaoh's daughter, someone who has spoken into your life, someone, maybe a teacher, maybe someone in a workplace, maybe someone who has helped you in your career, someone who's helped you in your ministry, someone who's helped you in your education, someone who has exposed you to a realm of experience that your natural family never could have. Find one of those women today and thank them. And fifthly, a Zipporah, okay? The parent to your children, whether you are male or female, find a co-parent today, someone who has helped with you to create a space of safety, of security and success for your children. I'm sure that in that group of 5, today, this week, you can find at least 2, there you go, 3, at least 3 of those women to reach out to and to thank and to honour. And of course, a last encouragement is to not only thank those who have played that role in your life, but also to reflect this week on how you can play the part of these roles in the lives of others. Ask yourself, how can I be like a midwife? How can I be a community member and help other people? How can I be a Jochebed and demonstrate the nature of God to younger generations? How can I be a good Miriam? How can I be Pharaoh's daughter and a good mentor? How can I be a Zipporah figure to people who seem hapless and hopeless and helpless and homeless, and help give them a sense of security and stability? How can I become one of these women? Friends, I trust that this message has blessed you today. As I often say, as I help encourage people on how to read the scriptures or approach the scriptures well, we are to read, we are to reflect, and we are to respond. Well, we've done a bit of reading today, we've done a bit of reflection. I trust that I can leave the response to you, and somewhere you can put some of this into practice. Why don't we pray, and then I'll leave you be. Father, I thank you so much for the power of your word, that it is living and active. And while today we have read a 3,500-year-old story, the truths contained herein and the wisdom that we can glean from this account is just as powerful today as we draw on the help of your Spirit. I pray that you would help every one of us today to respond appropriately to the powerful message contained in the story of Moses. And we together thank you for the powerful women who in our life have helped to shape us and have helped, as it were, to save us through our journey that has brought us thus far. We thank you for your word, and we bless the ministry of your Spirit as you hover over it right now in Jesus' name. Amen.